This session is going to be very interesting. When we are learning AWS, one of the first thing that we try to do is how to create a server. And if you want to create a server, the service that in Amazon that we use is EC2. EC2 stands for Elastic Cloud Compute. But whenever we are creating AWS EC2 instance or any server in AWS Cloud, we just go select the instance or select the AMI that you want to use and which flavor of Linux you want to use, and then select create next, create. But in reality, in any serious business, that's not how it's going to work. How it's going to work, let me talk about that. For demonstration, I'll try to go to the mirror board and try to demonstrate. For example, if you want to create an AWS EC2 instance in any region of your choice, for example, this is North Virginia. In North Virginia, you wish to create an EC2 instance or a server. For example, consider an Ubuntu server. Let's assume you are creating an AWS instance on the top of a server, on the top of a physical machine. So let's assume you have created an Ubuntu machine. Let's assume you have an Ubuntu based machine. So this is an Ubuntu server. Okay, fine. This server will have its operating system on the top of a root volume. That means it can have one disk or two disks or three disks. So I'm gonna consider this as a disk which is attached to it, which I refer it as an AMI. AMI stands for Amazon Machine Image, which is where the operating system is going to be installed. So let's assume it is connected to this. Now, whatever the data that the server wants to write, or whatever the data that is stored on this particular disk is going to be in a plain text. What do you mean by plain text? That means, for example, if you write like this, DevOps with AWS, whatever the data that is being written here is called as a plain text. It's called as plain text. But in reality, in any serious business, it's not how it's supposed to work. On Amazon's physical server, by default, if you don't mention, I do not want my servers to be shared by other hardware, there are other customers who can also create the servers on the top of the same physical server. They don't have a control, but Amazon can allocate. So Amazon promises, or Amazon is certified that your data is not going to be shared by anyone. What if there is another customer that has created the infrastructure on the top of the same server? What if he's trying to read the data? You're losing their organization data. And that's the reason your data that you're storing on Amazon or in any cloud should not be stored on the plain text. If I can't store my data in plain text, what should I do? You need to use something called as encryption. What do you mean by encryption? For example, if you consider this as a plain text, and if you are encrypting the data, it will be like this. Only your server can read the data. And the process of reading the data from the encrypted to decryption is called as a decryption. Okay, so this is a plain text and this is the encrypted data, and server, when it is reading, it tries to decrypts and then it tries to read it as DevOps. And this process is called as encryption and decryption. Again, changing from plain text to encryption and encrypted data to plain text can be done either by one key or two keys. Okay, which is also called as a symmetric encryption versus asymmetric encryption. Today in the session, we are going to create a server by using Amazon EC2 instance and at the same time by enabling KMS, which is nothing but key management system keys. It's going to be interesting. Please watch that. Okay, so let me try to go ahead and try to create a server in AWS Cloud. Right now, I'm in the Oregon region, which is nothing but US West 2. I'll go ahead and try to create a server. Come here, and I would like to launch an instance. Select the launch instance. For the purpose of demo, I would like to create a server without encryption first, Ubuntu without encryption. Okay, now I'll just select this Ubuntu. Ubuntu is one of the flavor of Linux. and I'm selected 22 version, which is a 64-bit architecture. And I'm going with T2 micro, which is a part of the free tier. I don't have to pay anyone. So I'm going to go with a T2 micro. But in certain regions in AWS, Amazon offers T3 micro as a part of the free tier. In those regions, T2 micro is not free tier, or it's not even available. Okay. And I would say I would like to create a key pair for authentication purpose. I would like to go with PPK demo. Create a key pair. So you'd be using that key pair to connect. And if you scroll down all the way down, and if you just launch the instance, it's going to launch the instance. It's very straightforward process, but whatever the disk that is going to be created as a part of this instance is not encrypted. That means whatever the data that you're going to store on this particular disk that is attached to this particular machine is not going to have any encryption. How do I come to know whether my disk is having encryption enabled or not? When encryption is enabled, whatever the data that you store or the server store is not going to be stored on plain text. That means whatever the format that I have shown. So for example, if you're storing DevOps, it's going to change in a format that only a server can understand. Even if someone tries to steal your disk, or even if someone tries to access the disk outside the account, even if they read, they won't understand your data. That way you are still safe. Okay, that's the reason in almost all the serious business, encryption should be enabled by default, but you cannot enable the encryption at account level. Instead, Amazon offers something called as enable default encryption. Okay, that means whatever the storage disks that you are creating on the top of AWS of your particular account, you can create a policy saying that I want my disk encryption should be enabled by default. If you enable that option, you cannot create any disk without encryption. Okay, that is an option that you need to enable. But in this demo, I'm going to show you, I'm going to create certain sort of keys. Using those keys, we are going to enable the encryption. Okay, once we create those keys, once we attach those keys to the instance, the data that is going to be stored will be encrypted. Okay, point to be noted. Once you create a disk, you cannot enable the encryption back. There is a rigorous process involved to do that. And that's the reason in all serious business, you will never ever create any disk or any instance without encryption enabled. Okay. And if anyone does that, that's considered as a biggest blunder. Okay. And again, coming back, how do I come to know whether my disk is having encryption or not? Select the storage and you can see there is no KMS ID attached. And at the same time, you can see the status is encryption is no. If you see this, that's a big mistake. And you can also enable policies saying that whatever the machines, whatever the storage volumes that I created in this particular account should have encryption enabled. But how can I enable the encryption? If you want to enable the encryption, you need to have something called as keys. Okay, so if you want to do that, you need to have something called as keys. Now you would have understood what is encryption. Encryption is nothing but a process of converting the plain text into a format that only the key which has encrypted can understand. That means if you have encrypted the data and if you have given the data to me, I cannot read that unless until I have the decryption key. Okay, so in a nutshell, this is how it works. So plain text hello, we are going to use keys, and using those keys we are going to encrypt the data, and it is going to be like this. And this is called as, okay, this is a ciphertext, okay, which is nothing but a encrypted data. All right, and once your data is encrypted, only the server, the instance that is having this appropriate key can decrypt the data. Now you have used this key to translate the data, to encrypt the data, and the data is encrypted. That means only the people or only the server that is having the key can decrypt the data. Okay, even if someone steals the data, it is 100% useless. Okay, and that's the reason whenever any storage migration or whenever any data center migration to cloud happens, when you're transferring the data physically using Amazon Snowball, which is a storage transfer service, the rule of thumb is your data will be encrypted on it. That means once your data is encrypted, even during the transit, if someone steals your data, still they cannot do anything because it is encrypted. Okay, so let's try to see how are we going to encrypt the data. So here in this image, whatever you saw is called as symmetric encryption. That means you just used one key to encrypt the data and decrypt the data. You also have another type of encryption called as asymmetric encryption. That means you are going to use one key to encrypt the data and another set of key to decrypt the data. This type of encryption is called as a asymmetric encryption. Okay, and in order to do both of these or either of these, you need to have these keys. Okay, back in days we used to generate the keys. Okay, and then we used to manage them. But if you are on cloud, particularly on AWS Cloud, AWS has a service called as a KMS. KMS stands for Key Management Service. So what I'm gonna do is I'll come here and I'll generate my keys. And the service, key management service in AWS is regional. That means if you create a key in Oregon, it can only be applied to servers or the storage devices that are created in Oregon. And if you are creating your infrastructure in California, this key will not work. Okay, so for the demonstration of purpose, I would like to create a key and I would like to go with symmetric. That means one key, both for encryption and decryption. That clearly says, and then all I do is I generate. And what is the name that I want to give? Encryption 002. Okay, so description, you need to give something. Use these keys for encrypting all AWS EBS volumes. Right, so always giving description is very much important because people should understand what is the purpose of creating. And also this key is something not everyone in the organization should have access. Only the selected member should have access. In my case, I have an user account called as B56 admin, which has administrator level permissions, or you can also select any user which was created in your account to give full access. Technically in organizations or in any serious business, you'll give access to a group of admins, not to a individual person. Okay, and I selected that guy B56 admin will have the complete access on the key. All right, now next. Okay, this is the code that is generating. So using this code also you can generate the key. Now I said finish. Now my key encryption -002 is created, which is asymmetric. All right, now that means asymmetric and symmetric encryption means the same key would be used for encrypting and decrypting the data. Now what I'm gonna do is I'll create one more server with encryption. Okay, Ubuntu with encryption. Launch the instance. All right, now Ubuntu with encryption. And all I do is I'll scroll down. I would say Ubuntu. Okay, you can select, the process remains the same. You can select Red Hat, SUSE, Linux, Windows, or anything. Fundamentally, the concept remains the same. And I'm not touching instance type or anything. I'll go with the demo keys and scroll down all the way down. Okay, and here when you're selecting the volume, you have that option. By default, disks or the EBS volumes in Amazon are not encrypted by default. Okay, it's you as a DevOps and cloud engineer, it's your responsibility. You need to ensure that the data within the project is encrypted by default. I told you the potential challenges of not encrypting the data, but Amazon is very much clear on it. So Amazon is offering the infra, it's you, your responsibility. How do you protect the data? Okay, GP2 stands for general purpose 2, second generation hardware. I would like to go with GP3, which is the third generation hardware. And if you are using the storage GP2, I highly recommend you to start using GP3. Okay, GP3 is the third generation hardware of storage. So here in the advanced section, you have an option called as volume. Select the volume. When you select the volume, you can see by default, the data that you stored on Amazon disk or the Amazon Elastic Block Storage is not encrypted. Okay. If in an interview, if anyone asks you by default, Amazon is going to encrypt the data for EBS, the answer is no. Unless until if you enable a policy in your account saying that all the Elastic Block Storage disks that are created in this account should have this key attached. Okay. In my account, it's not there. So I am enabling it at the disk level and I'm also selecting the keys. Just now I have created the keys encryption -002 and that's the reason I'm using it. Select. All right. Now all I do is I'll just click launch the instance. The moment I click the instance, whatever the disk that is going to be created is encrypted by default. That means only this server which has access to this particular key can read and write the data. Okay, if others try to access this information, for example, there is some XYZ virtual machine in other account. If they try to access the data, or because of some XYZ reason your server got compromised and your hacker had copied the data that is available in the disk, they can do nothing with the data that was copied by the hacker because it is encrypted. That means the data is not in a plain text format. He can play with the data, but he can't do anything because the data that is associated to the disk are encrypted. Okay, that is very one important thing. Whenever someone asks you in an interview, how do you create a server? Don't just say that I launch an instance, select this, that, and all. Ensure you add the option saying that I'm going to create a key, or I'm going to select or request the team or ask the team what is the key to be used in this project, and you're going to encrypt it. Encryption is very, very, very important, and it's one of the most underrated option when you're creating an instance. But in serious business, it will be there by default. But when you're learning, when you are saying something to someone, please try to add that you are going to use the keys. Okay, now you have created a server, and if you look at the server volume that is attached, you can see the storage disk that is attached to this has encryption enabled. And you can also see this is the key that is being used. This is a key identifier. All right. So this is how it's going to work. Okay. Now, just to summarize, now you know how to enable encryption in AWS and how to create a key in AWS. The key management, the KMS, is one of the service that's offered in AWS, which exclusively works on creating keys and assigning it to the other services. Okay, so similarly, you can use the same set of keys for encrypting your EBS volumes or any sort of storage things. In AWS, we have another storage service called as a simple secure storage. That's also called as S3. Even you can use the same keys for that. All right, and that's it. That's about encryption on AWS. If you like the video, please ensure you hit a like button. That encourages me and motivates me further to create some nice content. And tomorrow I'm gonna come with some very interesting video. Please stay tuned to the channel. Thank you.